Okay, I'm going to make this short because one, I've been sneezing my head off, and two, there ain't that much to this show. And oh, just in case you start hearing weird sounds like explosions, they're real. It's, how can I explain this? There's a tradition in the area I live in where, weirdly enough, they decide to start firing fireworks off well before July 4th. They could start up around, April to May, all the way going into July, and then a bit after July. So if you do hear fireworks, noises like boo, that's a real explosion from real fireworks in my area. Just so you know. So you don't go, what is that noise? I'm just saying that. Now, let's make this very clear. Was this a long show? Yeah. Well, was I bored? Yes. Now, mind you, it was not all about the wrestling that was boring. It's just, there's nothing here in SmackDown except for the bloodline. Legitimately, all that matters is the bloodline. So I'm going to talk about everything else first, and then I'm going straight to the bloodline stuff. First match, LA Knight versus Rey. Look, you know me. I love me, LA Knight, the former Eli Drake. He my boy. I've been talking about him for a decade. If anyone else thinks that there was someone who talked about LA Knight now, I'm one of the few that can say openly that I've been talking about him for a decade. Only time when I didn't talk about him when I couldn't see him. And that's when he left Impact Wrestling, TNA, to go to, he went back to, I believe he went back to LA, the promotion there, I forgot the name of the LA one. And then he went to Primetime Wrestling, then he went to NWA, which led him back led him finally over to WWE, and going from NXT to the main roster. I'm one of the few people that can honestly say that whenever I could see him, I reported on him. I reported him on TNA, Impact Wrestling, when he went over to NWA and then was seen on Primetime Wrestling and also LA Wrestling. I forgot the name of the promotion, LA Wrestling or West Coast Wrestling. There you go. West Coast Wrestling of LA, I believe that's what it was called. And then he went to NXT, and then he went into the main roster. I'm one of the few that can 100% say that I have been talking about him. There's probably been very few next to myself, if any. I'm one of the few have reported from Impact Wrestling to NWA to Primetime Wrestling to West Coast Wrestling in LA, then NXT, and then the main roster. I'm one of the few that have done it consistently across 10 years. 10! So, this is my boy. I've always said LA Knight Eli Drake was one of the best. There was only one thing he was missing, and finally he became a ring general to me personally. So seeing him go against Rey is actually a really cool thing for me. But here's the problem, and it's not because Santos Escobar came out, it's because he's a heel. He's a heel. And people want to cheer him. And they're going against the grain of LA Knight. He's not an in-betweener like a Stone Cold Steve Austin. But he could be close to being in-betweener. Close. He ain't one. But he can be a clear heel. He can be a clear face. And he could become somewhat of a betweener. But at this point, as a heel, he's not working. People want to cheer him. So they're going against the grain. Moving on. The match that I knew was going to be important, but I didn't care. Because I knew the outcome. That's the unification match between the Women's Tag Championship and the NXT Women's Tag Championship, which is now known as the Unified WWE Women's Tag Team Championship. I don't even need to talk about the match other than I expected them to be bitched out. Alba Fire and Aladon. I knew they were going to be bitched out. I know JD doesn't feel anything from them, but I've watched both of these women come up in NXT. Not saying they were done well. They were not. They didn't have a long stint in NXT due to the fact Alba Fire needed more time. Then Aladon came in. Then they had their feud together. Then they became tag members together. And then they became tag champs. And then they were taken off the damn roster. And they plopped on Now I'm saying the damn roster. Look, they take them from the NXT roster to here, and there was no point in pulling them up because there was no point at all. They could have done this on NXT. Honestly, they could have actually done this and made it important in NXT that the titles need to be unified. They could have left Isla Dawn and Alba Fire there. I'm being honest here because I don't see nothing being done for them now that they dropped those titles, and they both tapped out at the same time. They got their asses bitched out. But I'm gonna say this. I'm saying it. Between all four women, who's the most prettiest woman there? That is Isla Dawn. I'm saying that she's the most girly. She has the most figure. And she's the most seductress there. I have to say it because that's part of her personality. The most badass person there, honestly, is Shayna Baszler. Not because of her MMA background, but because of how she's been built over the years. When she wasn't bitched out herself. I'm just saying. Moving on. The Street Profits versus Pretty Deadly. Now, mind you, the Grayson Waller effect happened. And I'm going to tell you this. I've said this and I still stand by it. When you look at all the talk shows that have been done on WWE in the last decade, the most freshly feeling is Grayson Waller's because it's more modern. They have the look of Twitter. They tried to use actual streaming, kind of like what like Austin Fury was doing. It felt more recent. But I never said that he should be doing it exclusively and not wrestle. Because that's what's happening. When the fuck is he going to wrestle much? Wrestle much. When is he wrestling? If my nose is running, I was sneezing earlier, just in case. But, seeing that he's not wrestling is garbage. He's a better wrestler than he does the Grayson Waller effect. It was an added extra, not the feature. And pretty much we got Pretty Deadly on the show, and then we got the Street Profits, then we got the match, which I knew 100% the Street Profits were not going to win. There was either going to be a screwy ending, or there might have been something was going to happen to Street Profit and break them apart, which I didn't think was going to happen. Screwy ending. There you go. Moving on. The match I knew that was going to be another bitch out. And that's Lacey Evans versus Charlotte. Now, these two have faced each other multiple times. We currently have the Sergeant Slaughter version of, and I'm going loosely, Sergeant Slaughter version of Lacey Evans. She's not doing what Sergeant Slaughter did. Sergeant Slaughter did have his attitude, and he would, but you know what? When it was time to go, he wouldn't talk. He'd get the shit done. But when it comes to Lacey Evans, she's still acting exactly the same, saying these dirty, nasty things. Stupid. She is a former military SWAT officer. Instead of leaning into that and showing no emotion whatsoever, being really straight military, she's just dressed in military-ish garb, showing a lot of titty. Instead of using her real knowledge of how a military officer is. And I commend her. I want to say this clearly. I know no one else is going to say this. I know just Alex ain't going to say shit about this. I know JD's not going to say this. And anyone else, they will just glaze over it. I'm not going to do that. She's a former military SWAT officer. Special Unit SWAT. Just like SWAT from the police. I give her respect. This woman served the military. She deserves respect in that manner. She earned it as a SWAT officer. But when you see how she was booked as a Sergeant Slaughter knockoff, instead of them, before that, just using her as she was, tell her clearly, we want to do something different with you, Lacey. Or a real name, I don't remember her name. We want you to be like you were when you're in the military. In this situation, no attitude, no banter, no nothing. We want you to go out there and act like you're actually doing combat training. We want you to go out there, yes, be careful not to hurt anybody too badly, but go out there with an attitude, with no emotion. Be yes, sir, no, sir. This is how you act. Be like you're a drill sergeant. Do that shit, and you will get over. No screwing around. Letting her wear full military attire built from the ground up to not be too loose, but to look like a real military officer that is in the field. I believe that would have worked better for her. That she acted and leaned into her real strength as a former military soldier. No. Nothing. That's why she's shit. And that's the reason why she got her ass tapped out by Charlotte very quickly. I'm just saying. And in the end, I knew there was going to be something with Asuka, which she did. She beat her up a little bit. And she was hitting her so lightly. You tell me you noticed while Asuka was out there in socks, because she was probably wearing shoes, high heel shoes probably. She went out there, she whooped some ass, she barely looked like she even hurt Charlotte, and then ran away with a title. It felt, eh. The only thing I can say is this, and I'm saying this not to be sexualizing Charlotte, but you guys tell me below. Didn't it seem in her figure eight, her boobs look like they're about to pop out of her top? I'm not taking anything from her in the ring. She can wrestle. I'm not saying she's a ring general. She's not. Anybody says she is, you're lying. Because when it comes down to it, she can get herself over. But a true ring general gets herself over and the person she's working with. That's why her dad is recognized as a legend. She's not. She can get herself over. And only people she's heavily familiar with, namely Becky, Bayley, the former Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné, and honestly, and Asuka. Those are people she's so highly familiar with, she doesn't really need to worry about putting them over because they can put themselves over. I'm just saying. Last. This is connected to the bloodline. Let's make this very quick and very clear. What did we get from the match and from the opening with the Usos? The Bloodline Civil War. That's what they're calling it. Let me give it to you like this. Did Jay sound good? Yeah. But due to the fact of how they're also pushing Jimmy, it's messing up Jay. I'm saying this now. I'm not saying Jimmy wasn't talking well when they were talking about how family's supposed to be, how the bloodline was being dominant when we fell in line. But here's the problem. When you look at how things were 3 years ago when they did this, when the pandemic started, it was not both of them. It was Jay first, then Jimmy, who got his ass choked out by Roman Reigns. That's what this started by. The first one that came into it. And I feel like they're not leaning into Jay. They're leaning more into Jimmy making it about both of them than it's about Jay being the one that he should be focusing on. Because all this started because of Jay. Not Jimmy and Jay. Not Jimmy Jay and Solo. Not Jimmy Jay, Solo, and Roman. It was all about Jay falling in line to Roman before anyone else. And it should be about Jay. Now, hopefully they'll go there. And in the end, after the talk, Solo's pissed off. Holland gets his Samoan spike. And then a Sheamus getting pissed that Rich Holland gets his throat slit, in a sense, wants a match. And they have the match. In the end, Solo wins. I'm not surprised. He's supposed to win. Well, technically he didn't win, but he did because pretty much he destroyed Sheamus and the ref did a stoppage. The ref waved the match off. The female ref stopped it. I don't remember her name. K something? But then the Usos come out. Solo's half exhausted. Well, mainly exhausted. And he gets his head taken off multiple times by the Uso penitentiary. It's all about the Bloodline Civil War. Nothing else mattered on this show. Nothing. Nothing. When it came to Santos Escobar, it didn't matter about him. It didn't matter about Ray. It didn't matter about LA Knight. It didn't matter about Charlotte, Lacey Evans. The tag champs, who pretty much now going to have a returning Liv Morgan with Raquel Rodriguez to deal with now. I know I could have mentioned earlier, but didn't need to. I'm just saying this is all they had. I didn't care. But the bloodline was the most important thing, and it is still important to me, the bloodline, now that this Civil War started. But here's the problem. The Civil War is going to have to reach a point where someone is going to lose it, and someone, like the Civil War of the United States when it came to the South versus the Union, one of them had to say, okay, we quit. We submit to your authority. Say that again. I submit to your authority. Roman must submit to someone, because even after they end the bloodline does not mean it's over. Someone's going to be a winner. Someone's going to be a loser. It's not going to be the Usos winning over Roman and Solo, because I doubt Solo is going to be off on his own yet. It's going to be Roman having to submit to the Usos and Solo, or Roman is going to submit to Jey Uso. It sounds better as Jey because he started with him. It should end with him as Jey becomes the head of the bloodline and they can get more mileage out of the bloodline. I'm just saying, peace.